Today we are speaking on the subject, we're discussing the subject of anger. So I'm sure this is an emotion which almost everyone has experienced. So I would like you to actively participate with your questions and your comments. The Bhagavad Gita gives us a description on how anger leads to our destruction. In the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, text 2.62, Krishna says to Arjun, Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsaha Sangaste Supajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha Kamat Krodh Bhajayate. By thinking of the objects of the senses, by thinking of worldly objects and people, a person develops attachment for them. Dhyayato, thinking, Vishayan, objects of the world. Sangaste supajayate, he develops an attachment for them. Sangat sanjayate kamaha, and from this constant thinking of the objects comes attachment, and from this attachment comes intense desire or lust. Sangat sanjayate kamaha, he develops a deep desire for those objects of the senses or object of the senses, or even people. And from this, what happens? When something comes between the object you are desiring and your ability to attain it, your frustration leads to anger. Kamat krodh bhajayate. So dhyayato vishayan pumsaha sangaste supajayate sangat sanjayate kamaha kamat krodh bhajayate. You become angry because your desire is frustrated. Krodhad bhavati sammoha. From this anger, there comes delusion. Krodhad bhavati sammoha. Sammohat smriti vibhramaha. Sammohat smriti vibhramaha. And from this delusion that comes with anger, it's in most books or most Sanskrit translations, they have translated smriti as memory. And they say that when one is in delusion, one forgets memory. But actually here it's too complex to be explained just as memory. Smriti also means Shruti Smriti. Shruti is the scripture that we hear, and Smriti is the written scripture, written scriptural wisdom, which are actually the laws of the land, like Manu Smriti. So when you forget, in anger brings about delusion, the delusion brings about your heedlessness of the law. Smriti vibhramaha. Smriti brahmashad buddhi nasho. Having completely forgotten your position in society, having forgotten exactly your the laws of the land, the laws of social conduct, the rules of civilized behavior, your intelligence and your discrimination becomes void. Smriti brahmashad buddhi nasho, buddhi nashat pranashyati. So we'll take it again. Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita. What does he explain? This is often referred to by people as the ladder of fall, or how anger ultimately leads to your destruction. Dhyayato vishayan pumsah sangaste supajayate sangat sanjayate kamah kamat krodha bujayate krodhat bhavati sammoha sammoha smriti vibramah smriti brahmashat buddhi nasho buddhi nashat pranashyati. You begin to have thoughts of an object, or yes, even of a person, and constantly thinking of that object or constantly thinking of that person, what happens to you? You develop an attachment. And that attachment, which is a steady stream of thoughts going from you to that object, that steady stream of thoughts becomes an attachment. And that attachment leads to lust. It leads to uncontrollable desire to attain what you want because of your attachment. And when you strive to attain the object of your attachment and desire, and someone comes in between you and that object of desire, you become furious. You become overcome by destructive rage. And when you become overcome by destructive rage, you go into delusion. In this delusion, you forget your place in the relationship. You forget your place in society. You forget the laws of the land. You forget what you should do and what you should not do. So your discrimination is also destroyed. And as your discrimination is destroyed, buddhi nashat pranashyati. You meet with complete destruction. This is the characteristic, this is the classical ladder of fall as is described in the Bhagavad Gita 2.62 and 2.63. But Krishna also says elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita, what does he say? He says, Trividham narakasya idam dwaram nashanam atmanah kama krodha tatha lobhas tasmadeta trayam tejet. Once again, Krishna reiterates the destructive powers of anger, pointing out that it begins with lust. So first you have an uncontrollable desire or lust. This uncontrollable desire, when it is not fulfilled, when it is obstructed, it leads to anger. And the same uncontrollable desire, when it is fulfilled, it leads to greed. So kama, krodha, tatha lobhas. Uncontrollable desire followed by anger if it is frustrated, and greed if that desire is fulfilled. So Krishna wants that we should become free from uncontrollable desire. In fact, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita is constantly telling us to become free from desire and perform one's duty in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to this all-pervading Lord. Don't act for the fruit. So don't have that uncontrollable desire to get something for what work you're doing. Instead, work because it is your duty. Karmanyevadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phalaheturbhur mate sangosto karmani. You have a right to do your duty, for indeed your duty is the path to salvation. But do not aspire for the fruits of your action. Do not imagine that you are the doer of your action. Because all actions are performed by God through the function of Prakriti. Prakriti kriyamanani gune karmani sarvashah ahankara vimudatma kartam iti manyate. And don't be attached to inaction. Because indeed, God has given you that choice to obstruct, to prevent, to stop your Prakriti from acting. Therefore, let God act through your Prakriti. But never think you are the doer and do not be attached to inaction. And if you act in this manner without any desire for the fruit, in a spirit of sacrifice to this all-pervading Lord, you will attain peace, perfection, and the supreme destination. Yataha pravrittir bhutanam yena sarvam idam tatam swakarmana abhyarchaya siddhim vindati manavaha. Each person, by the performance of his God-given duties in a spirit of sacrifice to the all-pervading Lord, he attains perfection. So if you have no desire, if you act out of duty, and it is a duty that is offered to God, not to anybody else, the duty is to God, and you perform your duty in a spirit of sacrifice, then you will never experience lust, anger, and greed. If you remember God and forget yourself, by being absorbed in God, all desires will cease. Of course, your duties will not cease. And you must perform your duties, for that is the purpose of your creation. Sometimes people ask me this question, that if you say that anger should be given up, how can a warrior fight? How can a person who is taking advantage of me, how do I counter him or her? How do I, in fact, prevent being exploited and being taken advantage of? How do I deal with the anger that spontaneously arises? Indeed, I have already explained to all of you in the preceding sessions which I have conducted that to become sthita prajna, to become karma yogi, to become dhyana yogi, to become bhakti yogi, to become jnana yogi who is gunatita, You must be absorbed in God in forgetfulness of self. And then you reach that platform which is known as Brahmabhut, which is known as Sthita Prajna, which is known as Gunatita. Dukheshu anudvignavana sukheshu vigata spriha vita raga bhaya krodha sthitadi muni uchyate. You will be free from depression, free from excitement, free from attachment, fear. Yes, you will be free from anger. Such is the sage of steady wisdom. But for those of us who have not yet reached that lofty platform, though if you are following my instructions, you will be coming closer and closer to it every day. If you are offering everything in your life to God, yat karoshi yad ashnasi yat juhosi dadasi yat tapasyasi kaunteya tad kurushva madarpanam. If whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, whatever you give away, whatever charities, whatever austerities you perform, everything you're doing for Krishna. If you're doing your duties perfectly with the attitude of Om Tat Sat, this is an offering to you, O Lord. If when your mind is otherwise idle, you are chanting constantly the name of God. Kirtaniya Sada Hari. Satatam Kirtayanto Mam Yatantascha Dridvrata. Namasyantastu Mam Bhaktya Nityayukta Upasate. For such a person, he is situated on the platform of Brahmabhut. Brahmabhuta prasannatmana sochati na kankshati sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim lavate param. On this platform of Brahmabhut, there is no more desiring. There is no more regretting. There is no more liking or disliking. Indeed, you look with equal vision upon all individuals, and thus you transcend and become situated on the path of Brahmabhut, and you attain Parabhakti, or unmotivated, uninterrupted devotion to God. In the Bhagavad Puran, there is a very beautiful section which is known as the Avadot Gita. And in that Avadot Gita, there is an Avadut dressed carelessly, appearing like a madman, unshaven, hair uncut, unwashed, smeared with ashes. But from his eyes, one can make out that he is transcendently situated. So, the ancestor of Maharaj Yadu asked this Avadut to explain how he came about his transcendental wisdom and who is his guru. So he explains that he has 24 gurus. And while he has 24 gurus, which could be the subject of another talk, I am only going to quote him on his guru, which is the earth. One guru is the earth. And he says, I have learned to control my anger. I have learned to become tolerant. I have learned to be silent and endure from my guru, who is the earth. The earth is comfortable, clothed in rich vegetation and trees and forests. And men come and cut down all the trees. They remove the stumps and the roots, and they dig up the earth and plant grain. And they, after planting their crops and harvesting their crops, without letting the earth recover, they keep on planting year after year after year, never leaving the land fallow to recover. And consequently, what happens is all the nutrition gets drained out of this earth. They then dig deep into the water table that lies beneath me. And they keep drawing from the water that is in my reserves until all the water they have dug in those wells is completely exhausted. When that is done, they dig even deeper and they take out oil and they take out gas, which is used to further pollute the atmosphere. All these diggings, all this plowing, all this is torture for me, the earth says. And if this is not enough, they then do strip mining, removing all the soil, and they begin to dig the rocks beneath in order to mine that land. Until they have mined the earth sufficiently and there is absolutely nothing left. And the earth says, do you know how I tolerate this? Do you know how I am able to endure this? And the earth, who is the guru, one of the 24 gurus, says, I have learned to endure this by understanding that everything is done by the will of God. Tena vina tranam apina chalati. Not a blade of grass moves without God's consent. If a blade of grass moves on the left side, it is by God's consent. If it moves on the right side, that is also God's consent. I understand that whatever people are doing to me, they are doing helplessly. If people are troubling you, if people are harassing you, if people are abusing you, they are doing this entirely not of their own volition, but against their better thinking, against their will. They are being forced by God to do this. That God is the puppet master, everyone else is a puppet. And that puppet master makes these puppets act even against their own will. So I accept that God is doing everything. And people who are doing these things to me are doing it against their own will. And thus I learned to tolerate all this. Thus I become tolerant. Elsewhere in the Bhagavad, one person explains how anger is foolishness. It is inevitable that one person should cause offense to another or hurt another accidentally, inadvertently, without desiring to. Just like when you're eating your food and you're chewing your food, which you find very delicious, accidentally you will bite your tongue. All of you must have experienced this, that sometimes while eating food, accidentally you bite your tongue. Will you become angry with your teeth for this? Will you go to your dentist and say, this is the tooth that bit my tongue. Please extract this tooth. Please pull out these teeth because these teeth have bitten my tongue. The teeth and the tongue, they belong to the same mouth. They belong to the same person. And accidentally one causes harm to another, offense to another. Do you become angry? Do you become violent? Rather, you learn how to become more careful. So, by understanding everything is the will of God, by understanding that people act against their own will, as God and nature makes them behave in a particular way, we must control our temper. And seeing that everyone belongs to one spirit, to one God, we should not lose temper or take revenge, seeking to harm another. Yaj gnatva na punarmoham evam yasyasi pandava sarva bhutani asheshani drakshasya atmano. When you have learned the truth, you will realize all beings, they lie within me, they are in me, and they are mine. But no, we still experience very practical situations and circumstances. It is very nice and pacifying to hear the scripture. But what do we do when we are confronted with people who are making our lives unbearable? So I must explain to you what anger really is, how anger begins, what are the costs of suppressing anger, what are the costs of expressing anger, and what is the way to transcend anger. There are many types of anger. Some people have described 8 types of anger. Some people have described 7 types of anger. Some people have described 6 types of anger. But I don't want to complicate the situation. I want you to understand in a very simple way. Anger which we direct outside of us, anger which we direct inside of us. Anger which we direct outside of us can be passive aggressive. What is passive aggressive? What is passive aggressive anger? Have you ever come across this situation? Have you ever had somebody close to you saying, I am angry with you and I am not going to tell you why. You figure out why I am angry with you. And I am not talking to you either. This is passive aggressive anger. When people refuse to talk to you, when people turn their face away from you, when people or a person acts full of anger, but unwilling to express himself or herself, this is called passive aggressive anger. It's a terrible form of anger because there is no communication. The second form of anger is called destructive rage. And this we have discussed in the Bhagavad Gita, that there is what we call as destructive rage. And this destructive rage destroys, brings about illusion, delusion. It brings about loss of memory, loss of forgetfulness of your social position, forgetfulness of the laws of the land even. And brings about loss of discrimination. Both passive aggressive anger as well as destructive rage destroy human relationships, destroy peace of mind, bring about problems and complications in your everyday life. But there is a form of anger which is useful and beneficial. And this form of anger which is useful and beneficial is not reactive anger. It is what we call as proactive anger. And this proactive anger or this deliberate anger is also known as assertiveness. The purpose of assertiveness is to engage someone in changing their behavior. It is intended to improve the relationship between you and the other person. And there is a big difference between assertive anger and destructive rage. In assertive anger, you act with full and highest respect for the other person. Somebody cuts in front of you when you're standing in a queue. You may be waiting in that queue for a very long time. And this person suddenly cuts in front of you and stands there. What will you tell him? Assertive anger would be, Suniye ji, excuse me, sir. Oh Mahajan, we have all been waiting in this queue for so long, and the queue starts there at that end and it ends at this end. So please stand in the queue so that we can all be friends. Out of full respect, I am requesting you, please stand in the queue. So first of all, you speak respectfully. In destructive rage, what do? You abuse the other person. You give him ma, ben, galis. You abuse him in 100 ways. And eventually it may even become that you behave physically violently with that person. This is the difference between assertive anger and destructive rage. You never express assertive anger for any purpose other than improving the relationship. If you don't want to have a relationship with that person, then please don't waste your time talking to him. But if that person is very near and dear to you, if that person is your family member, indeed, that person may be your child or maybe your spouse, you express your assertiveness in order to tell them that, look, child, I love you very much. I am your father or mother. But when you behave in this way, it disturbs me. Because I imagine that you are going to grow up and then become an uncontrollable individual who will land up in prison. So don't steal from my wallet. If I don't correct you, society will correct you. And because I love you and I want a relationship to improve, I am telling you, please stop this behavior. This is assertive anger. What is destructive rage? When you catch your child, give him 2 nice tamachas on his face or her face, whack them on the behind, abuse them, lock them in the room, starve them. That is destructive rage. So assertive anger is to improve your relationship. Destructive rage destroys everything. It may destroy your relationship forever. Please remember that, in fact, if you experience reactive anger, it's often a secondary emotion. For example, you're driving a vehicle and a car just sweeps past you, almost hitting you. Actually, what do you experience? You experience fear because somebody almost hit you with their car. When you're crossing the road or when you're driving your car, if somebody sweeps past you, you experience fear. But fear is a primary emotion. To cover up this fear, you become angry. Arey sala, dekh, and you shake your fist. Because the first and primary emotion is fear, the secondary emotion is anger. Similarly, a child is in the middle of the road and a truck is coming to hit the child. And the mother shouts, "Come here!" And the child runs to the mother. And the mother hugs the child, kisses the child. The mother gets so angry that the mother gives the child 3-4 whacks. In fact, the child probably now realizes the truck was a better idea. Here also, fear is the primary emotion, and anger was the emotion that was used as a secondary emotion to cover up the primary emotion of fear. What happens when you suppress your fear? What happens when you suppress your anger? Just like when you feel fear and you use anger to suppress your fear, also what happens is that you are often in a situation where you can't express your anger. You may be I've seen experiences where people who live in a joint family are unable to express their anger. So they suppress their anger. People working in an office where the boss is constantly infuriating them are forced to suppress their anger in order to hold on to their job. What happens if you suppress your anger? In the brain, the centers for anger and fear are very close together. And when you constantly keep suppressing your anger chronically, when you never assert yourself, you get a short circuit. And the short circuit leads from constant suppression of anger, you then become a victim of anxiety disorder. You become a victim of panic disorder. For no reason, you begin to get scared. Your heart starts beating like a trip hammer. You find it difficult to sit in society. It's called agoraphobia. You just get up and you run away from a place where people have gathered. This panic disorder, these anxiety disorders are often the result of chronic suppressed anger. which is why it is so important for all of you not to suppress your anger. Anger can be expressed, anger can be suppressed, and anger can be transcended. Remember this. Anger can be suppressed, anger can be expressed, and anger can be transcended. The best of all is to transcend anger through having a deep understanding of philosophy, by taming the mind through remembering God and forgetting self, through chanting and through meditation. That is the best way to transcend anger. But what should you do if you have not been yet able to transcend anger? The first thing is that when you and somebody are talking and you lose your temper, immediately leave the room. Immediately leave the room on some excuse. Leave the room, because once anger has begun, it is very difficult to let it lie down. Because with anger comes a surge of hormones into your bloodstream. Adrenaline, noradrenaline. They surge into your bloodstream. Your blood pressure goes up. Your muscles become tense. Your head begins to throb. You're ready for fight or flight. Best thing is leave the room. Second thing is do not come back until at least 30 minutes have passed. This adrenaline which is circulating in your bloodstream will not go away. And if you try to go back and talk about the situation in less than 30 minutes, once again it will flare up. So go out, take a walk. Keep away from that situation for 30 minutes exactly by the clock or more. This is called taking a time out. Try to understand what is the cause of your anger. I've already explained to you last time or the time before that or in previous sessions that emotions arise from the stories we tell ourselves. But often we tell ourselves stories so fast that we don't even realize that we're telling ourselves a story. He's always doing this. This is what he did on that day. This is what he did on this day. He did this last month also. And then you tell yourself a story and whip yourself into anger. So immediately stop that. Identify what is the story behind your anger. Understand what is the emotion, whether your anger is a primary emotion or it's a secondary emotion most of the time. What are you afraid of? Think about how you can solve your fears or your problem. Ask yourself, is this relationship important to me? Is this person important to me? How important is it that I maintain a good relationship with this person? How can I explain to this person what is the problem with me? Why this subject makes me flare up? Then go back and learn to communicate. Of course, that's a different subject altogether, but then learn to share and learn to communicate. You should learn cognitive behavioral therapy or rational emotive behavioral therapy. They help you to control your thoughts, prevent them from becoming illogical. You're prevented from making cognitive errors or errors in thinking. For example, he always does this to me. Nobody always does anything to you. This is a cognitive error. It's called all or nothing phenomenon, or always never thinking. So learn cognitive behavioral therapy, rational emotive behavioral therapy. Learn to take deep breaths. Through taking deep breaths and observing your breath, your mind will calm down. Learn Shavasana. If you can do Shavasana 3 times a day for at least half an hour each time, your baseline level will be so low, it will take much more effort or much more disturbance to raise your blood pressure or to raise your anger. So I am going to not continue because I could go on for a long time. But essentially, I want to tell you that destructive rage is harmful for you, but suppression of anger is also bad for you. Therefore, you should learn either to transcend anger. If the issue is not important and that person is not really going to be in any relationship with you, transcend the anger. But if that person is important to you, if that relationship is important to you, if you're going to have constant interaction with that person, then learn to assert yourself by giving respect to that person, explaining to that person the importance of the relationship and that you value it and you value that person, explaining what this topic or this subject does to you, and you request and you ask that person to be considerate to you in either avoiding that subject or considering that subject in a different light. There are, of course, many communication techniques for this. I always recommend non-violent communication, which is one way by which you can actually diffuse and bring about love and harmony. There is also an entire school of communication called crucial conversations or crucial confrontations. They tell you how to deal in communication in these difficult situations. But of course, do it intelligently and do it by remembering God and forgetting self. By chanting the name of God, by taking His grace, you will calm down. Your mind is like Kaliya Nag, and Krishna is the name which you chant. And when you chant Krishna's name, Krishna dances on your mind, which is the Kaliya Nag, and makes all the poison in your mind exit your mind, just like Kaliya vomits out all the poison. So act in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to Bhagwan Krishna. Remember God and forget yourself. And by God's grace, you will handle all obstacles that come in your way in life. So I'll pause now. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to receive them.
Yes, sir. I think you've exhaustively covered the topic, but we'll still take a couple of questions. We have a question that says, what if an episode stays in your mind and the memory rages you over and over again when you keep thinking about it?
So first of all, cognitive therapy is a very good way to stop the wrong thoughts that are coming in your mind. We have irrational thoughts, we have irrational expectations, we have irrational beliefs. Through cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT and rational emotive behavioral therapy, that is REBT, there's training available for both of them in Bombay itself. So please do these courses because they will help you to become a more calm, normal person. But the method I recommend, above all, is to understand that everyone is acting under the will of God. That one should constantly chant God's name. And one should see that people who are acting difficult in your life are actually being made to act that way by God because God is trying to teach you something through them.
Right. I think our next question is, sir, since you've also taught anger, like any other emotion, needs to be utilized to enhance and improve our relationships, what does one do to undo the damage already caused via unregulated anger and rage?
That comes in the field of communication, which is beyond the scope of this talk. But be humble, apologize, and rebuild the relationship.
The other question that we have is, when it comes to our loved ones, our friends and family, it is said that anger is also an expression of love. Is that anger justified that we are with their friends and family for their own? I mean, we think it's for their own good.
If you give respect to the other person, if you don't belittle the other person, if you in fact try to explain that you're improving the relationship because you love that person, if indeed your everyday behavior manifests that love, then people will accept what you're saying. But if you're that angry type of person who's yelling and smacking your children left, right, and center, then nobody's going to listen to you. As a matter of fact, I'd like to tell you one last point, and that is what we call as irritable anger. Often when people are depressed, they're in such a deep funk, they're in such a deep downer, they're in such a dark mood, that the only way they can lift themselves out of that mood is to fire somebody, to yell at somebody, to get angry with somebody. Because that adrenaline gives them a high. And temporarily that adrenaline lifts them out of that depression. And they feel, I told him. I told him off. I told her off. And they feel good temporarily. They don't realize that they are feeling bad all the time. They're having depression. And to get out of that depression, they're losing their temper again and again and again and again. So if you find yourself in an irritable mood, please consult a mental health professional.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Shantanu. Before we close the session, I'd just like to remind our audience is that if they want Dr. Shantanu to cover a particular topic, because we've covered so many topics in the last 1.5 years. So please suggest topics that if you want us to cover, please write them in the Speaking Tree Facebook comments page section, and we'll try and cover them next week and the weeks after. Thank you so much, Dr. Shantanu.
Hari Om, Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna.